The morning sun beat down on Mike's pickup truck as he pulled into the driveway of 47 Sycamore Lane. He'd been running his renovation business for over 15 years now, working his way up from a one-man handyman service to a respected small crew that specialized in kitchens and bathrooms. They were known throughout Oakwood Heights as reliable, skilled workers who got the job done right. Mike took a sip of his coffee and glanced at the folder on the passenger seat. Inside was the contract for their newest job, a high-end kitchen, and master bathroom remodel for the Sycamore Estates HOA president. The money was good, really good, almost too good, which should have been his first clue. "Hey boss, you think this one's gonna be smooth sailing?" asked Dave, his foreman of 10 years, as he climbed out of his own truck. Dave was built like a football player but had the careful hands of an artist when it came to tile work. "Hope so," Mike replied, though something in his gut told him otherwise. The lady seemed pretty particular during the estimate. Particular was putting it mildly. Patricia Wilcox had inspected every tool in their belts, asked to see photos of their previous 20 jobs, not just the usual 5 or 6, and questioned their supplier choices with the intensity of someone interrogating a criminal. The front door swung open before they even reached it. Patricia stood there in pressed beige slacks and a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the breast pocket. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent look of suspicion. "You're 3 minutes late," she said instead of hello, checking her slim gold watch. "I expect punctuality from my contractors." Mike glanced at his own watch, 7:58 a.m. They'd agreed on 8, so... "Sorry about that," he said anyway. No point starting things off on the wrong foot. Traffic was a bit heavier than expected. Patricia sniffed and led them inside. The house was immaculate, with not a speck of dust anywhere. Family photos lined the walls. Patricia and a tired-looking husband, a college-age son in graduation robes, a daughter in a business suit similar to Patricia's own style. "Before you bring any equipment in, I need to show you the plans again," Patricia said, leading them to a dining room table covered with papers, samples, and magazines. "I've made some adjustments." Some adjustments turned out to be 17 new requirements and 5 changed specifications. "And I need this all completed within 3 weeks, Patricia added, sliding across a binder so thick it made a thud when it hit the table. "Everything you need to know is in here. Every measurement, every material, every deadline for each stage. Key." Flipped through it quickly. 37 pages of single-spaced text, color-coded tabs, and printed Pinterest images with notes scribbled in the margins. 3 weeks is pretty tight for this scope," Mike said carefully. "Usually a job like this would take 3 weeks, Patricia repeated, cutting him off. "The annual HOA home showcase is exactly 24 days from now, and my home is going to be the centerpiece." Her mouth formed what might have been meant as a smile, but looked more like someone had told her to show her teeth for a dental exam. "My predecessor had such a pedestrian aesthetic for last year's showcase. This year will be different." The way she said different made it sound like she was planning a revolution, not a home tour. Just then the rest of Mike's crew arrived. Tom and Ray, brothers who handled most of the heavy lifting and framing, and Jen, their newest member, who had an eye for design and handled the finishing touches. "Shoes off at the door," Patricia called out sharply before they'd even stepped inside. "And I'll need to see identification from everyone. I don't remember approving this many workers." "They were all listed in the contract," Mike said, keeping his voice friendly even as he felt the first real twinge of concern. Difficult clients weren't unusual in this business. People got particular about their homes, and that was understandable. But something about Patricia's demeanor went beyond the normal nitpicking. After checking everyone's ID and making them sign an additional waiver she'd created herself, which Mike would definitely have his lawyer review later, Patricia finally allowed them to bring in their equipment. But not before laying down drop cloths that she herself had purchased because she didn't trust the flimsy plastic things most contractors use. "I'll be working from home throughout this project," Patricia informed them, setting up a laptop at a small desk positioned with perfect sightlines into both the kitchen and down the hallway toward the master bathroom. "To monitor progress, of course." "Of course," Mike echoed, trying not to let his smile look as forced as it felt. Dave caught his eye and gave a tiny headshake that spoke volumes. This one's going to be trouble. As they unloaded tools and began taking measurements, Patricia hovered, behind them phone in hand, occasionally taking photos and making notes. The upper cabinets need to be exactly 18 inches above the countertops, she said for the third time in 10 minutes. Not 17, not 19, 18. Yes, ma'am, we've got it marked right here, Ray said, pointing to the measurements they'd already noted. And the backsplash tile needs to line up perfectly with the middle of the window. Perfectly. We always dry lay our tile patterns to make sure everything aligns properly, Mike assured her. The morning wore on, and Patricia's helpful reminders piled up like snow in a blizzard. By lunchtime, they'd barely managed to get started on removing the old cabinets because she insisted on inspecting each one before they took it out, photographing it for insurance purposes. Mike stepped outside to call their next client and push back their start date. As the phone rang, he leaned against his truck and looked up at the perfect blue sky, wondering if the good money was worth what was clearly going to be a challenging job. If only he knew just how challenging it would become. By the end of the first week, the whole crew was walking on eggshells around Patricia. The renovation had barely gotten underway, and already Mike was questioning if the money was worth the headache. Every morning started the same way. Patricia would be waiting for them at exactly 7:58 a.m., clipboard in hand, lips pressed into a thin line. She'd go through a checklist of items from the previous day, pointing out problems that nobody else could see. This corner isn't square by about 0.5 millimeter, she said on Thursday morning, holding up a level to a newly framed wall. You'll need to tear it out and redo it. Mike had to take a deep breath before answering. Patricia, with all due respect, that's well within normal building tolerances. Once the drywall goes up, I'm not paying for normal tolerances, she cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice steel. I'm paying for perfection. It took 2 hours and a call to the building inspector, who Patricia insisted on speaking with, directly, before she would allow them to continue without ripping out perfectly good work. The phone calls were the worst part. Mike's cell phone rang at all hours. 6:30 a.m. to ask what time they'd arrive, 10 p.m. to express concerns about the brand of nail they were using. Did you know, Dave said during their lunch break on Friday, keeping his voice low even though they were eating in their trucks to avoid Patricia's glares, that she called our supplier to check if we were really using the materials we charged her for? Lou from Oakwood Building Supply called me laughing about it. That doesn't surprise me, Tom said, unwrapping his sandwich. Yesterday she followed me to the bathroom and waited outside the door, said she was monitoring break times. She actually timed me, Ray added, had a stopwatch and everything, told me I took 4 minutes and 38 seconds and that anything over 5 minutes would be deducted from our payment. Jen, who handled most of the design elements, had it worst of all. Patricia seemed to take personal offense to having another woman on the job site. No, Patricia had said, watching Jen prepare to install the kitchen cabinet hardware. You're holding that drill all wrong. Let me show you. Before anyone could stop her, Patricia had snatched the drill from Jen's hands. The drill bit had skidded across the cabinet door, leaving a deep scratch in the custom cherry wood. Now look what you made me do, Patricia had snapped, as if the drill had jumped into her hands against her will. It took all of Mike's diplomacy, skills to smooth that one over, and Jen had nearly quit on the spot. Only the promise of a bonus had kept her on the job. By the middle of the second week, they were somehow both behind schedule and being pushed to work faster. Patricia had taken to sending emails at midnight with links to YouTube videos showing proper installation techniques, videos made by DIY hobbyists with none of the professional expertise Mike's team had spent years developing. Did you see the latest email? Mike asked Dave as they pulled up to the house on Tuesday morning of week 2. She thinks we should be able to install a custom shower surround in 4 hours because some guy on YouTube did it. Yeah, and did you notice the cut between him starting and finishing? Pretty sure that 4-hour job took 2 days, Dave replied, rubbing his eyes. None of them were sleeping well with Patricia's constant messages and calls. The real trouble started when Patricia found a barely visible scratch on one of the cabinet doors. Not even the one she had damaged herself, but another one that had come with a tiny imperfection from the manufacturer. "This is completely unacceptable," she declared, her face flushed with anger. "The entire cabinet set needs to be reordered." "Patricia, that's a minor imperfection that most people wouldn't even notice," Mike tried to explain. "It's on the inside of the cabinet door. Nobody will see it once your dishes are in there." "I'll see it," she insisted, tapping her foot rapidly against the floor. "And I'll know. The whole set needs to be replaced." When Mike explained that reordering would add at least 2 weeks to the project timeline, Patricia's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Well then, you'd better find a way to make up the time elsewhere, because the showcase is still happening when it's happening, and this kitchen will be ready. Maybe you need to work weekends. Maybe you need to stay late. That's not my problem. That's yours." The next day, Patricia left a 1-star review on every site she could find, even though the project wasn't even close to finished. The review claimed Mike's team was incompetent and trying to pass off damaged goods as acceptable work. "Can she do that?" Ray asked when Mike showed them the reviews during their lunch break. "The job isn't even done." "Legally, probably not. But it'll take forever to get the reviews removed," Mike sighed. He'd already called his lawyer, who suggested documenting everything in case they needed to pursue legal action later. The documentation started to pile up quickly. There was the time Patricia rearranged all their tools overnight to create a more efficient workflow. The morning she showed up wearing a dust mask and claimed the air quality in her house was being ruined by their work, even though they used industry-standard dust containment. The afternoon she brought in her own tape measure because she was convinced theirs was off by at least 1/8 of an inch. Through it all, Mike's crew tried to maintain their professionalism. They arrived on time, did quality work, and bit their tongues when Patricia made her more outlandish claims. But the tension was building, like pressure in a pipe that was bound to burst. "We just need to get through 1 more week," Mike told his exhausted team at the end of the 2nd week. "Then we never have to deal with her again." Little did he know that the worst was yet to come, and that the breaking point would arrive not with a bang but with a simple lunch break on a hot summer day. Wednesday of the 3rd week started like any other day, except for one thing: the heat. By 9 a.m., the temperature had already climbed to 87 degrees, and the weatherman on the radio promised it would hit the mid-90s by noon. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above asphalt and turns car steering wheels hot enough to burn your hands. Mike's crew arrived at Patricia's house at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, hoping to get as much done as possible before the worst of the cow. Heat hit. They were installing the Italian marble countertops that day, a delicate job that required precision and patience. Patricia had special ordered the marble from a quarry in Carrara, Italy, the same place where Michelangelo had sourced the stone for his sculptures. She had mentioned this fact no fewer than 12 times. "Be careful with that piece," Patricia warned as Tom and Ray carried in a section of countertop. "That single slab cost more than your truck." "Yes, ma'am, we know," Tom said through gritted teeth. Sweat was already beading on his forehead, partly from the weight of the marble, partly from the stress of having Patricia follow just 2 steps behind them, hands outstretched as if ready to catch the marble if they dropped it. The morning wore on slowly. The crew worked methodically, measuring 3 times before making any cuts. Normally, Patricia's hovering would have been annoying enough, but with the rising heat, it became nearly unbearable. The house's air conditioning was running, but with the doors frequently opening to bring in materials, it wasn't helping much. "Can we turn the AC up a bit?" Dave asked around 10:30, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "No," Patricia replied immediately. "It's already at 73 degrees, and my electric bill is high enough with all these power tools running all day." By 11:30, the temperature outside had hit 94 degrees. Inside, it wasn't much better. The crew had installed 2 of the 4 marble sections, and so far Patricia hadn't found anything to complain about. A minor miracle in itself. "Looking good," Mike said, inspecting the seam between 2 pieces of marble. It was nearly invisible, exactly as it should be. "I suppose it's acceptable," Patricia conceded, though her tone suggested she was still looking for flaws. But the real test will be when the light hits it from the evening angle. That's when imperfections show up. At exactly noon, Mike checked his watch and called out to his team. "All right, folks, lunch break, 30 minutes. The crew didn't need to be told twice. They carefully set down their tools, covered the exposed adhesive areas with plastic to prevent dust from settling on them, and filed out to the backyard. Patricia's property had a large oak tree that provided decent shade, and they settled beneath it with the lunch coolers they'd brought. Jen passed around ice-cold water bottles from her cooler, while the guys unwrapped sandwiches and opened containers of leftovers. For a few blissful minutes, they sat in peace, letting the slight breeze cool their skin. "Did you catch the game last night?" Ray asked his brother. "That ninth inning was incredible." "Best comeback I've seen all season," Tom agreed, taking a big bite of his sandwich. "Down by 4 and then..." The patio door slid open with such force it seemed a miracle the glass didn't shatter. Patricia stood there, one hand still on the door handle, the other on her hip. Her face was flushed almost purple with rage. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice so sharp it could have cut the marble they'd been installing. Mike stood up slowly, confused by the outburst. "We're having lunch, Patricia. It's noon, our regular lunch break." "Regular lunch break?" Patricia's voice rose with each word. "There's nothing regular about this project. Do you have any idea what's at stake here? The showcase is in 9 days. "Yes, we know," Mike said calmly, though he could feel his own temperature rising to match the day's heat. "We're on schedule. The crew needs to eat and rest, especially in this heat. We take 30 minutes, that's standard on all our jobs." Patricia stepped fully outside now, letting the patio door slam behind her. "Standard? There is nothing standard about this project. That Italian marble is sitting in there half-installed. The adhesive could be drying unevenly with this heat. Every minute you waste sitting around chatting costs me money." Dave tried to help. "The adhesive is fine, ma'am. We covered all them. Exposed? I don't want to hear excuses." Patricia's voice had reached a pitch that made a couple of birds flutter away from the tree above them. Her hands were gesturing wildly now, and in one sweeping motion, she knocked over Dave's water bottle, sending it rolling across the patio. "The adhesive is properly protected," Mike explained, working hard to keep his voice level. "We've been doing this for 15 years and we know how to..." "15 years?" Patricia laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "And this is how you work? Taking breaks when there's critical work to be done? What kind of professionals are you?" The entire crew had fallen silent, watching the confrontation with expressions ranging from disbelief to barely controlled anger. Jen was staring at her half-eaten sandwich like she couldn't remember what food was. Ray and Tom exchanged a look that spoke volumes about what they'd like to say but couldn't. Mike took a deep breath. In 15 years of business, he'd dealt with difficult clients before. He'd dealt with changes mid-project, with budget constraints, with unreasonable timelines. But he'd never dealt with someone who objected to his crew taking a basic lunch break. "Patricia," he said, his voice calm but firm. "My crew is entitled to a lunch break. It's not just company policy, it's the law. We'll get back to work in..." He checked his watch. 23 minutes. Patricia's eyes narrowed to slits. "Maybe you don't understand me clearly. This project has to be completed perfectly and on time. If you can't handle that level of professionalism, perhaps I should find a crew that can." A bead of sweat trickled down Mike's back, but it wasn't from the heat anymore. There was something in Patricia's tone that had crossed a line. Not just demanding, not just unreasonable, but deeply disrespectful of him and his crew as human beings. "Either get back to work right now," Patricia continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "or consider yourselves fired." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. The only sounds were the buzz of cicadas and the distant hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Mike looked at his exhausted crew, at the half-eaten lunches, at Dave's spilled water soaking into the patio stones. Then he looked back at Patricia's contorted face, at the woman who thought it was acceptable to deny workers a basic break on one of the hottest days of the year. In that moment, Mike made a decision that would change everything. "We quit," Mike said quietly. The words hung in the hot air, For a moment, it seemed like even the cicadas stopped buzzing. Patricia blinked rapidly as if she couldn't process what she'd just heard. "What did you just say?" Her voice had dropped. From a shout to something almost like a whisper. "I said we quit." Mike's voice grew stronger with each word. "This is a toxic work environment, and I won't subject my team to it anymore. We'll pack up our tools and leave." Patricia's mouth opened and closed a few times before she found her voice again. The shock on her face quickly morphed back into anger, her cheeks flushing an even deeper shade of red. "You can't quit. We have a contract," she sputtered, pointing back toward the house. "My kitchen is half finished. The showcase is in 9 days. Actually," Mike said, pulling out his phone from his pocket, "our contract has a clause about abusive client behavior. Section 8, Paragraph 3. He scrolled through his phone and turned the screen toward Patricia, though she didn't bother to look at it. "I've documented every unreasonable demand, every insult, and every interruption over the past 2.5 weeks, including this one." He held up his phone, which she now noticed had been recording the entire exchange. "You've been recording me?" Patricia's voice rose again. That's illegal. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state," Dave chimed in. "Only one person in a conversation needs to consent to recording it," and Mike consented. The entire crew had stood up now, leaving their half-eaten lunches on the ground. Each face showed a mixture of relief and resolve. They'd put up with Patricia's behavior for almost 3 weeks, and not one of them looked sorry that it was ending. "Pack it up, guys," Mike said, turning away from Patricia. "Get your personal tools first, then we'll deal with the bigger equipment." "You can't do this to me," Patricia was nearly shrieking now. "My house is torn apart. I'll sue you for everything." "You're worth," Mike turned back to her calmly. "You're welcome to try, but I have documentation of every interaction, including the times you called after 10 p.m., the morning you rearranged our tools without permission, and just now, when you demanded we skip our legally mandated break. My lawyer will be happy to receive that suit." As the crew moved toward the house, Patricia stepped in front of the patio door, blocking their path. "You are not leaving," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Not until my kitchen is finished." "Ma'am," Tom said gently, "you need to let us pass. We're getting our things and going." "No," Patricia planted her feet firmly. "You started this job and you're going to finish it." Mike sighed. "Patricia, please move aside. We don't want this to get any worse than it already is." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then slowly, Patricia stepped aside, but the look in her eyes made it clear this wasn't over. Inside the house, the crew worked quickly, gathering their personal tools and equipment. Patricia followed them from room to room, her phone now in her hand. "I'm calling the Better Business Bureau," she announced, "and the Chamber of Commerce, and everyone I know in the Homeowners Association. No one will hire you after I'm done." "That's your right," Mike replied, without looking up from the toolbox he was organizing. His calm seemed to infuriate Patricia even more. The crew carried their tools out to their trucks, working efficiently despite the heat and Patricia's constant stream of threats. When they returned for the larger equipment, they found Patricia on her phone, loudly describing to someone how they were abandoning the job and leaving her house in shambles. "The mixer and the saw are company property," Mike told his crew as they re-entered the house. "Let's get those loaded up next." "What about the materials?" Jen asked quietly. "The rest of the marble? The fixtures we haven't installed yet?" "All, paid for by Patricia." "They stay," Mike replied. "We'll only take what belongs to us." This seemed to catch Patricia's attention. She ended her call abruptly and hustled over to where they were talking. "What about my deposit?" she demanded. "I paid you half up front." "And we've completed more than half the work," Mike pointed out. "The cabinets are installed, 2 sections of countertop are in, the bathroom demo is complete, and the new shower, pan and tile are prepped. You got your money's worth." Patricia's face contorted with rage. "This is robbery. Highway robbery." As the crew continued to work, Patricia's threats escalated. She called them unprofessional, questioned their workmanship, and even brought up Mike's family, saying she'd make sure his kids wouldn't be welcome in the community pool that summer. That was when Ray, always the most hot-headed of the group, dropped the tailgate of the truck with a bang that made everyone jump. "Lady," he said, turning to face Patricia, "you need to back off now." "Or what?" Patricia shot back, stepping closer to him instead. Mike quickly moved between them. "All right, that's it. We're almost done here. Ray, finish loading the mixer. Jen, do a final sweep for any small tools we might have missed." Patricia, realizing her threats weren't working, suddenly changed tactics. She ran into the garage and emerged a moment later holding a paint roller on an extension pole. "If you leave now," she said, advancing toward their trucks, "I'll make sure you regret it." "Patricia," Mike said, his voice now stern, "put that down. You're just making this worse for yourself. You think I won't do it?" She waved the paint roller toward Tom's truck. "One swipe of this across your precious vehicles, and you'll be spending thousands on new paint jobs." Dave pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Patricia laughed, a slightly unhinged sound. "By the time they get here, your trucks will look like modern art exhibits." While Dave made the call, the crew finished loading the last of their equipment, trying to ignore Patricia as she paced back and forth, still holding the paint roller like a weapon. When she realized they were almost done, she ran back into the house. "You think she's done?" Jen asked hopefully. "Not a chance," Mike replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. Sure enough, Patricia emerged a moment later, but now she was carrying a garden hose with the water turned on full blast. Before anyone could react, she aimed it at the open window of Mike's truck and pressed her thumb over the nozzle to create a powerful spray. "Stop that right now," Mike shouted, running toward her. But Patricia just laughed and turned the hose toward him, soaking his shirt. The next few minutes were chaos. Patricia sprayed water at all of them and their vehicles, screaming about contracts and professionalism and how they'd regret crossing her. The crew tried to reason with her, then tried to avoid the spray, and finally just huddled by their trucks waiting for the police to arrive. When the patrol car pulled up 15 minutes later, they were all soaking wet, and Patricia was still shouting, though she'd dropped the hose when she spotted the officers approaching. "Thank goodness you're here," she called out, her voice suddenly sweet and trembling. "These contractors are trying to abandon their job and take my money." 3 months later, Mike sat on a hard wooden bench in the back of a courtroom. The air conditioning was blasting, a welcome change from that hot summer day when everything had fallen apart at Patricia's house. Next to him sat Dave, who had insisted on coming along to see it through to the end. At the front of the courtroom, Patricia stood beside her lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Probably from dealing with Patricia, Mike thought to himself. "All rise," called the bailiff, and everyone stood as the judge entered. The hearing didn't take long. Patricia's lawyer had negotiated the charges down from what could have been much more serious offenses. Assaulting a police officer normally carried hefty penalties, but her lawyer had somehow gotten it reduced. "Ms. Wilcox," the judge said, peering over his glasses, "you've agreed to plead guilty to charges of disorderly conduct, criminal mischief, and simple assault on a peace officer. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said in a small voice. That sounded nothing like the woman who had screamed at Mike's crew just a few months ago. "Very well. Based on your lack of prior criminal history and the agreement reached with the district attorney's office, I'm sentencing you to 100 hours of community service, a fine of $2,500, and mandatory anger management classes. Additionally, you'll be on probation for 12 months. Do you understand these terms?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia repeated, staring at the floor. As the judge wrapped up the proceedings, Mike leaned over to Dave. "Doesn't seem like enough, does it?" Dave shrugged. "Maybe not, but the real punishment for her was losing her position in the HOA. That meant more to her than anything." He was right about that. The news of Patricia's arrest had spread through Sycamore Estates like wildfire. One of the neighbors had caught the whole thing on video. Patricia screaming, spraying the hose, and then shoving the police officer who tried to calm her down. The video had circulated on the neighborhood's private Facebook group within hours. By that evening, several neighbors had called for an emergency HOA meeting. By the next day, Patricia had been voted out of her position by a unanimous decision. The new president, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Chen, had immediately reached out to Mike to apologize on behalf of the community. Mike and Dave left the courtroom, stepping out into the bright sunshine. They walked toward Mike's truck, which now had a new company logo painted on the door. Morgan and Crew Construction, quality work, no drama. So that's it, Dave said. Case closed. Yep, Mike nodded. Though I'm still getting calls from people in that neighborhood. Apparently, they're all desperate for reliable contractors now that word's gotten around about what happened. That was an understatement. The Patricia incident, as they now called it, had somehow turned into the best marketing they'd ever had. The story had spread beyond Sycamore Estates to the surrounding communities. Everyone seemed to have their own horror story about difficult clients or unreasonable HOA presidents, and everyone wanted to hire the crew that had finally stood up to one. 6 weeks after they'd walked off Patricia's job, Mike had raised his rates by 15%. 2 weeks after that, he'd raised them again. They still had more work than they could handle. Remember what Tom said when you announced the new company policies? Dave chuckled as they climbed into the truck. Mike smiled. The first thing he'd done after the Patricia incident was create a client code of conduct that all customers now had to sign before work could begin. It spelled out exactly what was expected from both sides, including respect for lunch breaks and reasonable working hours. He said we should send Patricia a thank you card, Mike recalled, for helping us realize what we shouldn't put up with. It wasn't just the code of conduct or the raised rates that had changed. The crew itself worked differently now. They were more confident, more willing to speak up when something didn't seem right. Jen had been promoted to lead designer and was now bringing in most of their high-end clients. Ray and Tom had gotten certified in eco-friendly building techniques, opening up a whole new market for them. As Mike started the truck, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and raised his eyebrows. "What is it?" Dave asked. "You're not going to believe this," Mike said, handing him the phone. The message was from a number Mike didn't recognize, but the name at the end made Dave's jaw drop. Thomas Wilcox, Patricia's husband. "Is he threatening us?" Dave asked, suddenly tense again. "Read it," Mike said. Dave read aloud. "Mike, you don't know me, but I'm Patricia's husband, Thomas. I want to apologize for my wife's behavior during your time working on our house. She's been under tremendous stress from her corporate job while trying to prove herself in the HOA position. That's no excuse for how she treated you and your crew, but I hope you can understand she's not always like that. The anger management. Classes are helping, and she's recognized that she needs to make significant changes in her life. I just wanted you to know that. Best regards, Thomas." Dave handed the phone back to Mike. "Wow, didn't see that coming. You going to respond?" Mike thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. "Nah. I appreciate him reaching out, but that chapter's closed. I wish them well, but from a distance." As they drove away from the courthouse, Mike couldn't help but wonder about Patricia's kitchen renovation. He'd heard through the grapevine that she'd eventually found another contractor who finished the work just in time for the showcase. Her home wasn't featured as she'd planned. That honor had gone to Mrs. Chen's tastefully updated mid-century modern ranch, but the event had still gone on. "You know what's funny?" Mike said as they stopped at a red light. "In a weird way, Patricia did us a favor. Before all this happened, we were taking whatever jobs came our way, working ourselves to the bone, dealing with whoever walked through the door. And now?" Dave prompted. "Now we choose our clients as carefully as they choose us. We're not just selling our skills, we're selling a relationship, a partnership. And that partnership has to be based on respect." The light turned green and Mike drove on, thinking about the crew waiting back at the shop to hear how the court case had gone. There was a new job starting tomorrow, a sunroom addition for a lovely older couple who had brought them homemade cookies during the estimate and insisted they'd have lunch ready for the crew every day. Sometimes, Mike reflected, the most valuable renovation isn't in a kitchen or bathroom. It's in how people treat each other. Dave nodded in agreement. And sometimes it takes a Patricia to make you realize what really matters. Mike laughed. As they pulled into the shop's parking lot, the whole crew was there waiting even though it was past quitting time. Jen was perched on the tailgate of Tom's truck. Ray was tossing a tennis ball for the shop dog, a scruffy mutt they'd adopted last month. They all looked up as Mike's truck approached, their faces curious and expectant. "Ready to tell them how it went?" Dave asked. "Yeah," Mike said with a smile. "And then I'm taking everyone out for dinner. We've got something to celebrate." "What's that?" "Patricia getting community service." Mike shook his head. "No. We're celebrating the day we decided what we're worth, and that some things are more important than money." As Mike stepped out of his truck, the crew gathered around, and he couldn't help but feel grateful. Not just for the business, success that had come their way, but for the lesson they'd all learned on that hot summer day. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say enough and walk away. The end.